Evil has existed since the beginning of humanity. But why do some people commit truly terrible acts? When we think about evil, it's tempting to imagine it as something distant, something that belongs to a select few, monsters, villains, or people who are simply born bad. But psychology tells a more unsettling story. It reveals that the capacity for wrongdoing, for abandoning our values, can exist in almost anyone, given the right, or perhaps the wrong, circumstances. Decades of research have shown that people's actions are shaped not just by their personalities, but by the situations they find themselves in. Take, for example, the famous Stanford prison experiment, where ordinary college students, assigned to play the roles of guards and prisoners, quickly descended into cruelty and submission. Or consider the Milgram obedience study, where participants, urged by an authority figure, delivered what they believed were painful electric shocks to strangers. These experiments shocked the world, not because they revealed a few bad apples, but because they showed how easily good people can be led to do harm. What drives this transformation? Often, it's pressure from authority, from peers, or from the environment itself. In a crowded office, a tense subway, or even in the privacy of our own thoughts, we can feel compelled to go along with the group, to obey orders, or to ignore our conscience. Social influences are powerful. When everyone else turns away from someone in need, we might do the same, not because we lack empathy, but because we fear standing out or facing consequences. Psychologists have spent years observing these patterns, trying to understand why people sometimes abandon their values. They found that anonymity, stress, and a sense of powerlessness can all make it easier to justify harmful actions. When we feel like just another face in the crowd, or when we're overwhelmed by negative news and constant demands, our moral compass can start to waver. But this isn't a story of hopelessness. By understanding the psychological forces at play, we can become more aware of the subtle pressures that shape our choices. We can learn to pause, reflect, and resist the urge to follow the crowd when it leads us astray. The psychology of evil isn't just about darkness. It's about the choices we make and the power we have to choose differently, even when it's hard. Throughout history, certain psychological experiments have become infamous for the way they expose the hidden depths of human behavior. Among the most well-known is the Stanford prison experiment, conducted in 1971 by psychologist Philip Zimbardo at Stanford University. This study set out to investigate how ordinary people would respond to the roles of guards and prisoners in a simulated prison environment. What unfolded over the course of just 6 days shocked not only the researchers, but the world. The experiment began with a group of college students, all of whom had volunteered and been carefully screened for psychological stability. They were randomly assigned to play the role of either a guard or a prisoner in a mock prison constructed in the basement of the university's psychology building. The guards were given uniforms, sunglasses, and batons, while the prisoners wore smocks and were assigned numbers instead of names. The environment was designed to strip away individuality and reinforce the power dynamic between the two groups. Almost immediately, the situation began to spiral out of control. The guards, who had been instructed to maintain order but not to use physical violence, quickly adopted authoritarian behaviors. They imposed harsh punishments, enforced arbitrary rules, and subjected the prisoners to psychological humiliation. The prisoners, in turn, become passive, anxious, and in some cases, emotionally distressed. Some even began to show signs of severe psychological trauma after only a few days. Zimbardo and his team were astonished by how rapidly the participants embraced their assigned roles. The guards, many of whom had previously shown no signs of aggression, became increasingly cruel and domineering. The prisoners, stripped of their identities and autonomy, became submissive and despondent. The experiment, originally scheduled to last 2 weeks, was abruptly halted after just 6 days due to the extreme emotional breakdowns and ethical concerns. The Stanford Prison Experiment revealed the powerful influence of situational factors such as authority, obedience, and environment on human behavior. It demonstrated that under certain conditions, ordinary people can be driven to act in ways that are completely out of character, even to the point of cruelty. The study's findings have had a profound impact on our understanding of the psychology of power, conformity, and the potential for abuse in institutional settings. Decades later, the experiment remains a stark reminder of how easily the boundaries of morality can be blurred when individuals are placed in positions of unchecked authority. Even average individuals can commit evil acts when they feel pressured or subject to higher authority. When we try to understand the roots of evil, it's tempting to look for a single cause, a simple explanation that can help us make sense of the darkness we sometimes see in human behavior. But the truth is far more complex. Evil, as we encounter it in the world, is really the result of just one factor. Instead, it's often a tangled web, a mix of ignorance, fear, greed, and a host of other influences that shape our actions and decisions, sometimes in ways we don't even realize. Ignorance can play a powerful role. Sometimes people commit harmful acts simply because they don't know any better. They may lack the information, education, or perspective needed to see the consequences of their actions. In other cases, ignorance is willful, a refusal to see the truth, to acknowledge the pain or suffering that one's actions might cause. This kind of ignorance can be just as dangerous, blinding people to the humanity of others and making it easier to justify cruelty or indifference. Fear is another potent ingredient in the recipe for evil. Fear of the unknown, fear of losing power or status, fear of being different or excluded. These anxieties can drive people to act in ways that are harmful to others. History is filled with examples of individuals and groups who, motivated by fear, have lashed out at those they perceive as threats. Sometimes, fear is manipulated by those in authority, stoking division and suspicion to maintain control or achieve their own ends. Greed, too, is a familiar force. The desire for wealth, power, or resources can lead people to make choices that harm others, whether through exploitation, corruption, or outright violence. Greed can be insidious, creeping into decisions, both big and small, and it often disguises itself as ambition or pragmatism. But at its core, greed is about putting one's own interests above the well-being of others, regardless of the cost. And then there's the influence of our environment, the social, cultural, and institutional forces that shape our beliefs and behaviors. We are all products of the worlds we inhabit. The norms and values of our families, communities, and societies can encourage compassion and empathy, or they can foster prejudice, aggression, and indifference. Sometimes people commit evil acts not because they are inherently bad, but because they are following orders, conforming to group expectations, or trying to fit in. The pressure to belong to be accepted can be incredibly powerful, leading ordinary people to do things they might never have imagined. Authority figures, for example, can have a profound impact on our actions. Studies have shown that people are often willing to obey orders from those in positions of power, even when those orders go against their own moral compass. The desire to please, to avoid conflict, or to escape punishment can override our better judgment. In crowded city streets, surrounded by strangers, we may feel anonymous, disconnected from the consequences of our actions. In group discussions, the opinions of others can sway us, sometimes leading us to go along with things we know are wrong. Understanding the psychology of evil doesn't mean excusing or justifying harmful actions. Instead, it gives us the tools to recognize the warning signs, to intervene before harm is done, and to create environments that encourage empathy, accountability, and respect. Scientists and psychologists study these patterns not to absolve people of responsibility, but to help us predict, prevent, and ultimately understand the full range of human behavior. By shining a light on the mix of factors that contribute to evil, we can begin to build a world where compassion and understanding triumph over ignorance, fear, and greed. In the end, evil is not just external. It is part of the human psyche that requires awareness, ethics, and accountability.